This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dune Talk. So today we're going to be continuing our movie review series, where we're going to be going scene by scene, talking about all the insights that we've picked up on and all the lore after watching the movie multiple times. That's the case for all of us, and we hope you're having a good week and you've also had the chance to see the movie multiple times, depending on where you're living, of course. So I'm Marcus Gabriel, editor at DuneNewsNet.com, here today with Garen.
Hey, it's Garen again. Good to see everyone. Excited to dig more into this movie.
Yes, Johnny Sobchak here. I feel like, I know I was on last week, but I feel like I've been missing something just because there's, again, so much Dune discussion happening, I feel like, online in the meantime between episodes. So yeah, I'm really excited to discuss this some more because I've seen it several more times as well.
Simon Dowdy here. Excited to talk about it. And once again, sorry, Australia, you still have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, so we're going to start with just a little bit of movie news.
Dune Movie News.
So the only story that I want to touch on today is that Dune has just, as of yesterday, has crossed the $300 million mark at the worldwide box office. So that's about over 71 million is coming from domestic, 229 million coming from overseas. And one of the things that obviously stands out for that is how well received the movie has been doing overseas, especially when you look at Europe. So if you basically exclude domestic for a moment, so if you take US out of the picture, Dune is the fourth highest grossing movie, English language movie of all of 2021. So it's behind Godzilla versus Kong and No Time to Die and F9, and so Dune has done better than for example, Marvel movies like Shang-Chi, Black Widow, etc. So yeah, overseas is impressive, and we need to keep in mind that it has just released in the domestic box office around 12 days ago. Of course, there's going to be some additional challenges. So, Johnny, I want to hear from you. Like, what does this milestone mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is really good by all accounts. And Warner Brothers, the presidents of distribution, domestic and international, both made some statements. Yesterday when it crossed 300 million, just discussing how well it's being received and how well audiences are responding to it, and clear indications that they are going and seeing it multiple times in theaters, which is always a very positive, strong word of mouth, here in the US and overseas as well, especially in Europe, as you mentioned. This is just, it's really good. It's 300 million in the bag, Villeneuve's biggest film ever. I believe it's in about a month's time is when it's going to be released in Australia and New Zealand. And Australia is not an especially small market for movies. We'll see what, how people turn out for it, all things considered with the pandemic and et cetera. But I think it's going to definitely get across 350 million. We'll see how close it gets to 400 million. It's going to be close. But wherever it rests, it's going to have a good total. It's going to be impressive and better than probably what most people thought, especially with the effects of the pandemic and the HBO Max day and date deal. And also, we know that as of right now, it's past 70 million in the US. It's coming up on its third weekend, and it's going to lose its IMAX screens to Eternals. It already lost a lot of its other premium format screens as well. So this is going to be purely regular screens. But I'll be curious to see, especially another thing to factor in as far as box office in the US is in a couple of weeks after it, after this coming weekend, when it loses its HBO Max availability, if there's going to be any bump in the numbers, if anyone's going to go to the theater instead to see it, or continue to go to the theater now that they won't have access to it on HBO Max. So I think honestly it has a really good shot at crossing 100 million domestic, which would be a great marker. I think that presumably everyone's probably happy with it, and we already know we're getting the sequel regardless, but everything after this now is just more the cherries on top of what we've already gotten, just giving them more confidence and more reason to be excited and happy about the performance of this movie and how much they're willing to commit to a part two, and then the franchise as a whole. So really great. I'm excited and pleased, and keeping an eye on the numbers.
And looking at China specifically, so that was like over 33 million, and that was after the domestic. It was the highest performing market overseas. But compared to what some other movies that have done this year in China, for example, Godzilla versus Kong, like, do you feel that the Chinese box office was disappointing in any way?
Not especially. I mean, it's not like, as you pointed out, it's not up to the par set by some other films this year in particular. But it's also the first entry in a new franchise, comparing it to something like Godzilla versus Kong, which is, of course, Godzilla is always going to be big regardless, King Kong as well. You put those two in a movie and it's already in a franchise that is a direct continuation of recent films that have come out in the last few years. That makes sense. I think but comparing it to stuff like, Blade Runner 2049 or the recent Star Wars movies, how some of those have done, especially The Rise of Skywalker, because that's the most recent example. It's done better than both of those. So I would say, given the genre and the pace of it, the tone of it, I would say it's a decent, first entry.
Yeah, and it's interesting because looking at some of the themes of the book, and especially what came out in the movie, like where you have the emperor in power, and you have like Jessica being a concubine. It does have parallels to a lot of themes that are popular in other Chinese stories. So I'm wondering if they could lean into that more in the marketing. But yeah, hopefully that after the release and leading up to part two, there will be some further marketing opportunities there as well. Yeah, stay tuned, as we'll be keeping up to date on the remaining box office progress, as well as the home releases as those are confirmed. So because we have a lot of material to cover in the movie, let's go straight into our scene by scene breakdown. So last week we had gone through the Gom Jabbar scene because director Denis Villeneuve had done his own breakdown. So we got to get in some of his insights and how he approached that scene. So we're going to pick up right after that. So the test has been completed, and Lady Jessica and the Reverend Mother Moham walk out, and it's basically, you see that the Bene Gesserit have arrived, and they're basically left almost immediately. So that's much quicker than how it took place in the book, because of course in the book, like there had been like a day in between. So they had arrived, and like they had met, the Reverend Mother had met Paul, and then like he had some time to prepare for the test. So we had first the Reverend Mother and Jessica were talking, and Jessica was having a discussion. Did you have to go that far? And the Reverend Mother was emphasizing about that. Yeah, she's trained him in a way, so he doesn't get a free pass out of this. He has to go through the same testing procedure. And then we had after the Reverend Mother had left, and by the way, you hear that really like eerie music with the strong female vocals as the ship leaves, and you have Paul and he's out there in the rain. It's a really striking scene, and Jessica talks to him, and there we get a lot of the introduction of like the concept of the Kwisatz Haderach and what that means. So I'll start with you, Garen. Like, looking at how they handled the explanation here, what did you think from this scene?
Yeah, so I really, on my fourth time watching this, I really clued into this scene to get a sense of what kind of information Villeneuve is trying to make sure the audience gets here. And I thought they did a really masterful job of getting a lot of key points that Jessica was supposed to have, only daughters. And I've been to the movie now with people who don't know the book as well as me. And it wasn't until the second viewing that these people close to me actually caught on to all of that. So as we've talked about on this podcast before, the first time you're sort of overwhelmed, but the second time these pieces start to fit together. So I love in this scene, first of all, I think it's a beautiful scene where the Reverend Mother's walking ahead of Jessica. Jessica's trying to keep up. There's this sort of reprimand by the Reverend Mother to say, you weren't supposed to have a son, and really just sort of bringing this all together, that Jessica is playing a pivotal role and she hasn't followed the rules here. I think there's a lot of symbolism of this, where Jessica she's one of the Bene Gesserit, but it's like she's being left alone, left to her own devices now. And I just think there's a lot of key points happening in this scene. I think Jessica's really humbly, she's really kind of, her head's down, she's looking down. But my favorite part of this segment is where she turns and then she's startled because she sees Paul kind of a little ways in the mist. And I love the way that was set up. I love the distance. I love the look on Paul's face, because Paul is basically looking to his mother, who he's trusted up until this very day, that he was going to be taken care of by the woman he trusts. And now he's looking at her skeptically, like, what have you done here? What is this? There's a plan here? I thought I was your son. I just think this is such a powerful scene.
I agree. It's probably one of the top 5 scenes for me. And especially the turn from Jessica to Paul kind of caught me off guard. I was like, whoa, Paul's being a little bit creepy right there. But he does want to know, like, what just happened? What did I just go through? What is this test? Who are these people? And I think the storytellers, Denis and the whole entire team, does such an amazing point, giving you the bullet points of what could have been 20 minutes of dialogue. But it's just like, this is what happened. We need a girl. You give us a boy. You messed up, Jessica. We're mad at you. What, there's a program? Am I the chosen one? Is this what my destiny is? But so we've been saying for such a long time that this movie is so slow and giving those characters those moments. But this feels like a natural dialogue. Like, Paul's angry at his mom right now. Like, at this point, I wonder if this is where he starts not trusting her. And we'll go into it later when we go to the 10th scene, but when he's like, you did this to me, you're Bene Gesserit's way. And I think this is the beginning of him being like, what, do you even care about me? Or am I just a science project in a weird way? So it is definitely amazing. Rebecca Ferguson, just her acting, even without saying words, just the impression on her face is just stunning. Like, I have it on pause right now, and it just breaks my heart when I see her, because I actually feel bad for Jessica at this point.
And just thinking from when Paul woke up that night, and his mother tells him get dressed, and he goes and sees Dr. Yui, and then he's talking to her before the Gom Jabbar scene, and he's like, wait, how does the Reverend Mother know about my dreams? And she doesn't answer. It's just like from that point, I think he's definitely lost trust, and I feel it's been a painful experience for both of them.
It's definitely one of my favorite parts of the movie, because there's a lot going on there between the characters and internally, externally. The part where he does before the Gom Jabbar test, where he's like, how does she know about my dreams? And she just doesn't say anything, because just earlier on in the movie, before the ceremony, she was like, are you having more dreams? It's it seems like she's doing this out of general interest, or out of some sort of feeling for her kid, but it's actually I'm just probing to find out if something needs to be done, if we can move ahead with this test where you might die during it, but hey, aftermath of the test and what's going on between Paul and Jessica. That moment, the very first time I watched it, that moment where she turns around and she looks up and she's kind of startled, and Paul is standing there. That's one of my favorite moments, one of my favorite shots in the entire movie, actually, because it is so perfect and totally illustrates just so much about this character of Paul, of the relationship between the two at this point, where it's going. It's just the lighting and the mist, and his face is cloaked in this darkness. It's just so good. And then of course this dialogue, this back and forth. It is a lot to take in, especially if you have no reference to it with the previous film or the books. but I think it does a really great job. They do such a good job with the screenplay in making things succinct and not going into too much detail, not completely overwhelming someone, but making it clear enough where, this is what she's saying he's supposed to be. This is what the Bene Gesserit are trying to do. And that is important because that is, that goes a long way in understanding who Paul is going to be and why he's going to be that way and how it's come to that point. I also love the line. I've been thinking about it recently. I think maybe after the last time I saw it, but the line where Reverend Mother, I don't know if this is in the book or not, but she says that their plans are measured in centuries, I think is what how the line goes. And if that's not in the book, I mean, that's a perfect distillation of the Bene Gesserit and their plotting and their planning and their entire, methodology behind what they do. That's just such a great line. So I really like that. I really loved, Charlotte Rampling, just unbelievable in just the small amount of screen time we get. I can't wait to see more of her. All things to plan, we are going to see a good amount more of her. So, I really love this exchange. That stretch of time. I love the whole damn movie. Let's be real. But that stretch of time with the Gom Jabbar test and the leading up to it when he gets woken up, and then the test itself, and then this kind of fallout, and seeing the emotional, distress between these two characters, especially Paul. Chalamet just crushes it, and his the way he feels crushed and he looks crushed by what just happened. I loved this because it's pivotal. It's really pivotal. So I thought they couldn't have asked for a better job. I thought they did a really brilliant job with it.
And to the point earlier about the Bene Gesserit, because just in that one conversation, we haven't seen much of Bene Gesserit as a whole as a faction. We've just met two of their members, well, three of their members in total. But that conversation first between Jessica and the Reverend Mother, and then between her and Paul, you get to understand that these are people who are women who are operating in the shadows of an Imperium. They're controlling the politics, but then at the same time they're preparing the way for the Kwisatz Haderach. And also the point that Reverend Mother made there about that they've done all that they can for them on Arrakis. That's going to be referenced in a bit, but that's an important point that we'll get to. And then after this, we get straight into a really atmospheric, really visually stunning montage, basically when they're departing from Caladan, and it's obviously focusing on Paul. He's just had, his his past 15 years of not really comfort in a way, because he has been trained in the ways of fighting, in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, and to become a duke, but this is the first time that the rug's been pulled out from underneath him, and he's really faces uncertainty. So you really sense that as he sees these scenes the Atreides frigates rising above the sea. Simon, what did you think of that scene? Basically the montage departing from Caladan.
I think this is perfect example why, if you can, go to the theater. If you can still see it in IMAX. That shot makes every Star Destroyer in Star Wars look like a micro machine. It's just beautiful. And one little shot of him holding water. When you first see the movie and you don't know that much about it, you're just okay, he's holding water. He lives by a river, an ocean. But that scene is so crucial for later, because when we start talking about the spice harvest, when he looks at the sand, it's very much the yin and yang. Even just the coloring is very much, right now it's that kind of green, dark. And then when we get to the sand stuff, it'll be more bright and more sunny. I love that montage. It's simple, but it's also Paul in a way saying goodbye to this world that he knows and hello to the unknown future. I think it's a gorgeous scene. And the score, once again, in the theater, just makes it so epic. It feels like that big scale. I don't personally talk about the music as much as you three do, but Hans Zimmer, just amazing.
I love this scene because it feels like the way they used to make movies 50 years ago. It gives you a sense of pondering on what this character just experienced, and Timothy Chalamet does a great job of doing that. You can just see I don't know how he does it, but you can actually see on his face that he's processing all this. He's okay. We're leaving Caladan. This is my home. What am I in for here? What is going to be happening to my world? And I just think I love the pacing of this. I know to maybe my 15-year-old son, this is a slow part of the film. He didn't say that, but I'm just guessing, because this is not typical of a lot of big epic movies that we have today. But I love this scene because it's giving me a little bit of time to process and empathize with Paul and what he's going to have to deal with here. And just these, these amazing, epic shots of these freighters coming out of the water, which I just think is such a cool idea, that they're parked under the ocean or whatever. I just think that's so cool. But it's really that I don't care. I mean, there's the cool factor going on, but what I care about is Paul. And that's what is making, I believe, this movie work so well, is because I'm thinking, what is this kid thinking? What is he going through? What is weighing so heavily on his mind?
Going back where you were talking, Garen, I was watching it. Thank you, HBO Max. And it was that whole entire scene also with them packing the bull again, and just there was a great interview that was released earlier this week or last week, I don't know, with Joe Walker about one of his favorite shots in the movie. And it's just Oscar Isaac's hand, and Rebecca Ferguson's neck, kind of like, we got this. Everything's going to be okay. We get Paul, who is our main character, but we also get his parents and seeing like, we're getting ready. We're also, like we've talked before, Duke Leto knows like his time's running out soon. And I think Jessica is starting to be worried, like, what did I just put Paul through? It's just a beautiful montage without making it such like an 80s Rocky train sequence, Yeah, I agree with you, Garen. It's classic filmmaking 101.
I loved really, I think it was like the more recent couple times that I've seen the movie where I thought about it. But when it comes to Paul, he's on the cliffside and he's like sitting there and he's like, it's like he's just picking grass, it seems like. And I really love that, because it's like, if you were about to leave your planet like forever and you were never going to see grass again or a tree or anything like that, like, what would you do? I mean, honestly, I might be out there just rolling around in the grass. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, just the tiny little, that kind of, and in his eyes, as Garen pointed out, in his face, you can see that he's kind of like really processing, like, wow, this is actually like, he like kind of looks up and he's kind of like squinting, and he knows like the ships are coming up, like we're getting ready to leave. But just the way, they're emerging like these, I think I wrote my review, like these leviathans, like out of the sea. And it's like this, it's, Leto was talking about air power, sea power. That's how they've been ruling. And this is like, a perfect, example of the last thing that I always note is that feeling at the end where there's the sunset, and that's really like the last thing you see. And then it cuts to the highliner above Arrakis, and it's coming out. It's like that the sun is like the last thing, the bright orange on the horizon, and then it cuts to Arrakis, like just the orange red globe there at the end. It's just a great, like, it's just such a great transition. They couldn't really have done a better job. And it's funny because I knew that the ships were going to come out of the water. Like, we had seen that, or at least heard about it. And it's still like awe-inspiring, especially as you said, if you're seeing it in IMAX, like that is a reason to go see it. Like, just for that sequence alone, it's just so good with the sound, the music, and the visual.
And we were talking about the symbolism, of course, like Paul puts his hand in the water, and then that's later on in Sparth Harvester scene, but also that walk along the shore, that's also like really symbolic in terms of this being like a transition in his life, because that's where like the sand meets the water, like the land meets the sea, and this is representing the transition that they're literally just about to jump on. And I know that was one of the final scenes they shot. So it's just so much meaning packed into this just 1 minute scene. And then of course we do have the arrival on Arrakis, and that basically does go really quick. Like we don't get any like time with them traveling. It's just basically, you know, we see these frigates leaving, and then we basically see these frigates now coming out of the Highliner and descending straight into Arrakis, and we see that from the bottom perspective. So it's a really impressive sight seeing these frigates coming down from the sky, like almost like religious symbols in a way. So that was interesting, and you have the bright sunlight. So Garen, starting with you, how do you think they handled the transition from one planet to another and that arrival sequence?
Yeah, so this is interesting because one of my favorite parts, and this is kind of funny, but one of my favorite parts of Lynch's Dune is the transition of the Atreides ships into the Highliner and then the arrival in Arrakis, which has been criticized because on Lynch's film, the Highliners just don't look very realistic. It just looks like a painting. But there's something about that whole transition of all of these ships getting into this big guild Highliner, and then the whole folding of space thing. And so I thought that watching Villeneuve's version, I was gonna, if it didn't explain to me or elaborate on what this transition would be like of folding space and traveling, you know, millions of light years in a second. But I love the way Villeneuve has done this. In fact, the Highliner, it's almost like it's a wormhole kind of a thing, because it's not like there's this folding space action that we see as the audience. Maybe it's happening in there somewhere, which it is, I guess, in the book, but it's like, it's not really this transitionary process that I'm going to dig into mentally, but I just love how elegant the whole process is. Very different than what Lynch envisioned, but there's just something so elegant and beautiful about it. I'm glad he didn't spend time going into the process of folding space.
You know, it's interesting when we see them land, when you were talking, Marcus, that's really a religious kind of thing. It could be, you know, the angels from above. And also, if you look at those chips, they're really designed like crosses and also chess pieces, because Dune is one giant chess game, you know, between the different houses. I like that they didn't spend time explaining folding space, like you said, Garen, because I feel like most people would be like, what, huh? I'm lost. Okay, I'm done now. You know, if you want to know, cool, read the book. It's been around for a while, you know, but it's also just a nice transition. So smooth. Joe Walker is my hero this week, by the way.
But in this first movie, you don't need to see any of that. Like we understand what's happening. You know, they've said in some dialogue earlier on, Joe Walker's voice talks about, you know, how the spice is used to navigate the stars and things like that. That's all we need. I think later on we can get more into the navigators and maybe we'll see inside of a Highliner, but that was not something that I felt was necessary. Would it have been cool? Sure. There was probably dozens of things that would have been cool to see or include, but for what we needed, the necessity and to keep things simple, I thought that was a good choice. And of course, on the navigator front, the little tease we got with the Herald of the Change was enough for me, and weird and strange enough, I thought.
I am very disappointed on the lag of pugs again, because in the Lynch movie, they're holding a pug. Just saying. Release the pug cut.
You know, I had a memory, you guys, of being a teenager, and I remember when Dune came out on video cassette, and I was at a friend's house. I think it was his birthday party or something, and his mom rented Dune. And I remember my friends who, you know, we were all like jocks, and you know, we weren't that much into things like that, but I had read the books, and or at least I'd read the first book, and I remember my friends were into this film until the folding space scene. And then they all checked out. They were just like, what is happening here? You know? And so I wonder if Villeneuve remembered that and was like, wait a minute, let's have some compassion on the audience and not overwhelm them with folding space. Let's just have a beautiful transition, get them to Arrakis, and we can explain that later. So I think it was a genius creative move.
the frigates, they land on the ground, and as it happened, you see the scale, because you see these masses of people who look like ants, like waiting for the frigates to arrive, and then you have, of course, that scene, like when they're standing in front of the door and it's opening, and there's the obvious parallel with the film Arrival. If you haven't seen Denis Villeneuve's previous films, like definitely check out Arrival. Like there's so much insights there, and it's also a film that gets a lot into dreams. So highly recommended. And then, so basically, you have all that sunlight. So it's really contrast from what you had on Caladan, like cloudy, stormy nights, and here it's like this bright sunlight, and you see it shining in Paul's face. And there's also a lot of intimate moments in that scene, because you see like the details of Leto going to hold Jessica's hand. You have Leto; he's also, as the door opened, he looks back at Paul. So there's basically a lot of interaction between the characters going on there. And then you have Gurney, who's reciting his poetry and starts the ceremony. And I have to say, like, talking about the score again, like this whole piece sometimes is playing in my head, like just the Atreides music and the march. It really stays with me.
What is Arrakis like? Well, as soon as those doors go down, I mean, I love their facial expressions, like the squinting in their eyes, and like the way the wind is hitting them, and like their hair is flowing, and her headdress is flowing with her veil. I love that. And then the sand, there's that shot of the ground as the ramp is going down, and then the sand and dirt just comes flying in. It's a whole new world for sure. And there's the Gurney quote. I love that. I love that they included that. And it is kicked off by the Atreides bagpipes, as you mentioned. And that's, so closely associated with this movie now, and so memorable. And it's so funny because, it's actually in the score. Like it starts out as this, actual music in the world of the movie. And then the score comes in, and that's layered on top, and now is even heavier and more epic. But yeah, they come out. I love. There's just so many little details. The way Gurney stops and grabs Jessica's hand to like help her get down. The way Paul sees through fear and goes running after him, gives him a hug. It's exactly what I wanted to see. There's like some level of like pomp and circumstance to it, but it doesn't really last that long, because for example, they start walking toward the ornithopter, and like her dress is like just getting whipped in the wind. Like it was like kind of this, like, it's kind of beautiful, but also at the same time it's like, this is like, the conditions are rough, and it just has this. I've seen some people, this is something that has been spoken about since the very first images came out of the movie. And then, of course, the first trailer and the first footage we got, it became more of a talking point. But the color that they chose to go with for Arrakis, for the sand, for the world, they used like basically like a bleached like LUT for the film, as far as the color grading goes. And I just thought that was so smart. I love that so much more than if they had tried to do like orange, or like, some similar to like the David Lynch film, for example, or like The Martian from Ridley Scott a few years ago. Like I'm glad that they stay away from that. For one, it just looks more natural, I guess. Of course, it's an alien world, but it just looks like more believable, like something like I could associate with that I've seen in real life. But also it just has like, it just seems so sterile, and like, I think it was Greg Fraser talked about, like, you believe that this world has no water anywhere. Like there is none to be found in the ground, in the sky. I don't know if anyone else has mentioned this or seen it or seen it elsewhere or said it, but there's not a single cloud in this movie. That's like a very minor detail probably, and most people probably won't even notice that. But it's just like a gray, clear sky. There's just nothing. There's no vapor in the air. There's no, condensation. And again, just a little minor detail, when they're flying across in the ornithopters, you can see that, you can sense that. And of course, I think one of the key takeaways as far as building the world in this scene is the Lisan al-Gaib myth that is quickly introduced. They're on the ground for about 5 seconds, and then we're hearing the chants and the cries and the calls, and the back and forth between Paul and Jessica. Again, you're feeling some of the tension from the previous scene, where he finds out that he's part of some plan, and that there's things going on that are above his understanding or control, and this myth is part of that. And Jessica pretty much admits, the Bene Gesserit have been at work here, up to no good, in other words. And she doesn't, they're laying the path, or clearing the way, whatever you want to call it. And Paul, as he does here and there throughout the movie, kind of calls it out, or like is becoming more aware of the issues behind this. And as he says, I love this line. I mean, it perfectly fits, but they're just seeing what they've been told to see, and that is what the Bene Gesserit did. They planted the signs so that when these people show up, that's what they believe is happening. And it just builds out the world a little bit. It starts to build up this myth of Paul and his mother, and that's really important. And I thought it was done really effectively. And the costumes in the scene, of course, are amazing. I think that goes without saying. Her gown is amazing. The headdress, the jewelry, their armor. Again, that was kind of like a talking point. Some people didn't like it that much. I have thought it's amazing the entire time, and it looks even better in the movie. The military dress that Paul, like through fear, wearing, I just thought it was all great. Really, it's believable, but it still feels alien and strange, and especially when those ornithopters start up. Garen's probably going to talk more about that in a second, but it's so good. Oh.
I agree with Johnny about the Lux. So the Lux is a way that you can color correct something in Premiere or Final Cut or any editing program. If anyone doesn't know, like, I can make this podcast look like Dune. I can. There is a Lux out there right now that someone made. But I love the arrival. I love that they see Thorfinn Howard, and the stare between Jessica and him. If you know a little bit more about what happens in the book, and sadly we got some of that cut in the movie, but that stare is just, that seems intense. And Jessica's wardrobe, the costume design, like the Atreides armor, I'm very hit or miss on it, but Paul and Jessica just look like royalty, especially if you look like at her handmaidens just helping her carry that long dress. I was like, eat your heart out, Padme. Like, this is royalty at its best right now, and it's just so beautiful. And you're right, they're already going, oh, there he is. He's the one that's gonna bring everything back to Arrakis. And Paul's like, no, I'm just a kid. Leave me alone. It's so interesting when you really break down Paul. It's like you have all this pressure on you, but you're like, no, just leave me alone. I'm just a kid. Like, don't put this pressure on me. And you see it more and more the more I think we talk about it and we watch this movie. It is a gorgeous scene, and the scale of it, once again, IMAX. I've seen this on my iPad. I've seen it on my iPhone. I've seen it on TV at home, whatever. It's just the scale. It's breathtaking. And when they open that door, when you first get introduced to Arrakis, I feel like you're like, whoa, am I going to get sand in my eyes? Because it just feels, the wind is something just right there on the arrival. It's great. And I agree with you, Marcus. People should watch all the Denis movies, especially Arrival. Like, I wasn't a big fan of it the first time I saw it, but the more I think about it now, I'm like, I need to go back and rewatch that.
Going to the point about the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the other world, and like how we discussed earlier in the conversation between Bene Gesserit and the Reverend Mother Mahayam and Jessica about how they've been preparing like Arrakis for them. They've done all they can, and while some for example the Lynch film like like left ambiguity around there. Like here, it's clear from the beginning that like Paul is not a Messiah figure. He's very special. Like he has these like special abilities. He has the dreams, and that's going to become more and more important. But like this whole mythology and like the superstition, that's all it is. Like he's not like really a Messiah who's coming down to save him. And I love how they just like clarify that right at the bat, and that becomes more important as the movie progresses.
Yeah, Marcus, I think that is a really, really important point, because sometimes I think people even misinterpret Frank Herbert's book. They think he's actually saying, look at what a real Messiah can do and what the implications of all that are. His whole point is we need to be really careful who we think our leaders are. Right. So establishing this within the first few, 20 minutes or so of the movie, I think is really a great decision by Villeneuve, because you're right. Lynch's movie left that really hanging out there even till the end of the movie. Right. I mean, you're like, OK, this guy really is a god, I guess. But that's not the case. And to have us know Paul, like you were saying, Simon, as this young teenager who's just trying to process what's happening in his relationship to his mom. But then we immediately see these indigenous people of Arrakis, and they're pointing, they're saying Lisan al-Gaib, they're saying there's the mother and there's the son, that's the Messiah, right? But we know, even someone who hasn't read the book, they're putting it together to say, wait a minute, this is all a fabrication. This is all superstition, like the conversation between Jessica and Paul. So this is a beautiful scene. It's an excellent transition into being introduced to this world. It's world building at its best, but it's also got really important points that establish who the character is and what this Messiah myth is all about.
Yeah, and then here you get, as saying, the introduction to the world. So they get into the ornithopters and they're flying towards Arrakeen, and like that scene, like seeing it, especially the first time, it's really impressive, because you're seeing them going over these cliffs, and the exposition is quite natural. I felt in this case, it's explaining, this is what you would want to know when you're arriving on a planet. That it's a population center. There's a shield wall that's protecting it from the sandworms, and that they want to get out of the heat as soon as possible. So, of course, Garen, I want to hear your perspective on this approach of Arrakeen and the ornithopter flight.
Okay, so I'm not going to go off like I usually do on the ornithopters, but I just want to say, though, that the ornithopter test is what helped me compare two different IMAX screens' sound systems. So the first IMAX screen I saw this on, this first scene where we're flying over Arrakeen, and we've got, where the ornithopters pass right by the camera, and you hear all that. It was not thundering in my chest. The second time I went to it was a little bit of a larger screen. It's both IMAX, but it had been around longer. And that scene was just thunderous. I mean, you could just feel the ornithopter engines and the thudding of the wings in your chest. So my overall impression of this scene is it just looks very real. I mean, most audience people today do have a discerning eye. We can see when something's just not quite, real. That's CGI. It just stood right out. This really felt it. In fact, it kind of reminded me of Lord of the Rings, where a lot of these, like, the Orthanc and some of these things were like actual, they were actually real models, and they filmed it that way so that it looked totally accurate. I don't think they did that with Dune, but it really looked authentic to me, and it felt like this is a real city. It's there's not windows, as we can see. It's like everything's like bunker style, to survive the incredible storms and just the harshness of this planet. But overall, I totally bought into it, and the camera angle, the way it shifts as the ornithopters kind of come into park, and you see the line of palm trees kind of whipping in the wind as those ornithopters are coming by. I just thought, wow, I don't know who's doing the CGI. I don't know if it was Weta or who it was, but wow, I was believing it the whole way in.
My first reaction of Arrakeen was, "Holy crap, it's big!" Like, and I love like what you were saying, Marcus. It's showing us, hey, there's going to be this whole entire town, this whole entire compound, I guess you can even say, that's getting protected because of the shields, because of the sandworms, and possible attack. Spoilers, right? But when you go back later and you see this movie for the second time, and after the attack, you're like, whoa, there was a lot of damage because they had to get pretty far into the city to hit, the main place where they're staying. But it's the scale. I agree with both of you. It is the epicness of Lord of the Rings, Lawrence of Arabia, of seeing this is a world that's lived in, not just, hey, look at these pretty CG shots, cool. Oh wait, they're all in night, like Coruscant on Star Wars. But it's, once again, it's seeing all the little details, the palm trees. Like, I didn't notice the palm trees until you mentioned it. I also love that you see what could be Fremens up on a mountain looking. It's those little details, and it's just the scale. This is where, the first 30, 40 minutes of the movie, there's a big scale. But now we're really introduced to Arrakis and the scale of the IMAX experience.
I think the only thing that I would have wanted to see here was like actually like some shots of like how life was on the streets. Like I really hope that they have the opportunity to do that in part two, because here of course you see this is a big population center, but you don't actually see any of the the city life that would have been interesting to see.
Really, it's one of the most impressive shots in the movie to me, because it does, I mean, it's this huge long aerial shot, and presumably this is all computer generated, not real, but it certainly feels and looks very real. And just the way they are managed to capture the scale of everything, because that courtyard, or at least where the palm trees are, we see that a couple scenes later when Paul's walking through there, and it's huge. I mean, it's a very large, wide space, and we also see it later in the movie when they're executing the soldiers. And so you know how big it is when you're down there, but when they come flying in like that, I mean, it looks so tiny. I mean, it looks like a parking lot. And so that was, I thought they did a great job just establishing the scale. And then the one other little detail that they did, apart from the Fremen on the mountainside, which I thought, again, that was a great little thing, was and it's something they established as soon as they got off the ship, which is the wind and the heat and the sand blowing. When they're flying across, the wind is just whipping, and you can see it's like this constant, like almost like a mist of like sand flying off of the like rooftops and the covered streets and walkways of the city. And when the camera turns around at the end and it kind of looks back the way it came, and you see the Blade Runner-esque palace that they are staying in, there's a ton of sand like accumulated on there, and it's just kind of blowing off like constantly. And it just adds a little bit of like tangibility to it that, maybe you wouldn't have noticed or thought about if it wasn't there. And it was just no wind and no sand like blowing in the air. But because that little bit of atmospheric, particle effect that they have going on, it just adds like that little extra bit. So that's something that I probably thought about the most, seeing it a few times now.
One other thought, you guys, about the Streets of Arrakeen. I don't know.
It's a great album, by the way. The Streets of Arrakeen. The Streets of Arrakeen is a great punk album.
Are you serious?
Not real?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought it was one of your albums in your vinyl collection, Simon.
No.
Villeneuve, he actually says how he didn't want to have this look like Star Wars, right? And the risk you run is having any shot or image that immediately takes us to Tatooine. And I wonder if maybe there was a decision to avoid the Streets of Arrakeen kind of shot, because it might feel a little bit like Tatooine or Anchorhead, or and I just thought of that as a possibility. But I think we will, because it is in the books and it is a sprawling city. So I think, we'll see that later on.
And the way they really get away with it in this iteration is that the streets are covered. So it's all stone or cement or whatever it is atop. And there's like, I guess, certain elements potentially where that aren't covered that we see later on in the movie. One example, the best look at a street that we get in the movie is when Duncan is flying through one of the streets. He goes down and under, and you can see there's like, it seems like little shops and like covered like carts and things like that. So you get the sense that there are people down there usually when there's not a giant attack going on in the middle of the night. But when they fly over in that aerial shot, we would expect to see a bunch of people moving around and things like that. But we don't, because of how it's been carefully designed.
Yeah, and then this is the point in the movie where things do get quite fast paced. And I think if you compare like think of the movie as different acts, this would be like one of the acts where they probably had to like compress and cut a lot of things from the book. Like if you look at the past arrival in Arrakis, there's, for example, no there isn't the dinner, the banquet scene, that there isn't the confrontation between Lady Jessica and Tufir Hawat, which Simon, you were mentioning earlier. We do get that look, so it's inferred that there is some distrust between the two of them, but we don't get to see that played out. And for example, also later scenes with like the drunk Duncan Idaho, so that's also a detail that's not here, but we do get to see quite a lot, and it plays out quite quickly. So we immediately like have the on arrival, the conversation with Duke Leto and Gurney, and you get the picture of the two moons, and how that's wreaking havoc on their communications. How the city is actually quite quiet, and you see that they're already talking about strategy. How can we defend this? There are some vulnerabilities. They have to protect the spaceport. They have to protect the spice refineries. So there's already like a lot of information that you get like shortly after their arrival.
It's great storytelling once again, because like you said, Marcus, it explains, okay, if someone was going to attack, allegedly, this is how they could get away with it. So it's telling the audience, like, pay attention to this, because, in about 20 minutes, we're going to get an attack. Telling the audience something, but not dumbing it down.
The scene with the shout-out mates. So in the book, we had a bit more explanation before, like Jessica was informed like who it was, but here she basically walked out into the room and she singled out shout-out mates and, had the rest of them leave. Garen, how do you think that scene played out?
I actually really liked the authentic feeling I get from the shout out mates that she is a very fervent religious believer. At first, when she's having this interaction with Jessica, I love Jessica's hand signals, which I think we've learned now was actually a suggestion from Rebecca Ferguson, and she actually designed some of the hand signals is what I've learned. I think that was super authentic, a real homage to the book, right? Because that's a big part of the book. But I love the fact that I'm looking at this woman, and she's like having this religious experience as she's handing the crysknife, to the Lady Jessica, and she kind of starts. It's like she's moaning, kind of this exuberant, like revelatory moment that she's having, and she says something to the effect of, when you finally see revelation happening, it's overwhelming, or whatever her words are exactly. And so I think this is a really key moment where we're learning more about the Fremen, and we're seeing this religious fervor in these people it's like they don't disbelieve these superstitions at all. They believe them to the hilt. And so I love that establishment. And I just love, this is another Lady Jessica Bene Gesserit moment where you see her in complete control of this potentially dangerous situation, because she's calling out that the shout-out has a weapon. And then she tells her, you don't want to do this. It won't go well for you. But she stays calm. She stays in control of the situation. So I think this is just a great establishing moment that is sort of beyond the shout out is the housekeeper. That's sort of an ancillary piece. It's telling us a lot more about Jessica and the Fremen.
Yeah, and then we have after the shout out Mape scene, we have the scene where Paul goes outside, and it's basically at the point when the sun is really high and it's bright, And he basically walks in the courtyard and sees a palm tree, and there's a couple of things going on because you also have like the crowds of people who are standing outside. Like I guess that's like a quick glimpse we get to see of like life in the city, although it's mentioned that those are pilgrims. Johnny, how do you think that they handled this scene with the palm trees?
Well, the transition I have to start with from the shout out Mapes kind of religious moment and experience that she has with Jessica, and then the way it goes from that into the other Fremen, the pilgrims outside praying. They had, the costumes again are amazing. You see that the blue eyes, the eyes of Ibad, clearly for the first time. And then it moves to outside and it moves into the palm trees. And then you see Paul walking over, and it just builds up the world a little bit more. It builds up a little bit more of, it builds up Paul as a character because he's kind of like, he's showing interest in the culture. He's showing interest in these people. He's, I love the line. It always makes me laugh where he's like, well, they're outside. Like, why can't I be out here? And so I thought that was great. And then of course there's the moment where he says, well, shouldn't we not get rid of the tree? Should we not save the water and use it for, because once he hears it in the context of these lives that could be using it, which we know from the book is a big, point of contention. Well, why don't we get rid of them? And also this little the bit actor for the scene, I thought he was just great. His little banter back and forth with Paul and the way he kind of explains it. I just thought that was really strong, and the way that it concludes with him talking about, well, it's like a dream, and it alludes to the fact that there was this notion or idea at one point that they could change Arrakis into a different, through terraforming into a different, world full of water and plants and all that. So that for me, especially as a book reader, I don't know, for anyone else who hasn't read the book, I don't know what exactly they would think of that necessarily, but I really like that one because for the world and for Paul, I thought it was important.
And then the next scene that we get into is where Paul is back in his room, and he's looking at the film book which we've touched on earlier, and there's the Hunter Seeker. Garen, what was your thoughts about first the film book and then how they portrayed the Hunter Seeker?
I thought the film book was absolutely ingenious because even though I had read the books many times, I could never quite picture in my mind what was meant by film book. Of course, in 1965, a film book, probably in Frank Herbert's mind, was something like a talking book with a screen on it or something, who knows? But I just thought it was a brilliant idea to have this 3D projected, kind of image. And I love, not only do I love the tech part of it, I love the look on Paul's face. Chalamet nails this, where his eyes kind of like that look of my kids when they've been looking at their phone too long. It's like they're just sort of really into the thing they're watching and nothing could distract them. He had that look on his face. So it just was very realistic to me. I thought the Hunter Seeker, so when, of course, I know it's coming in this moment, I know what's happening here. And you see, a laser or something carve out this little hole in the bas relief of the wall, and then you see it coming out. And all I've ever really had to kind of base off this is my own vision in the book and then the Lynch movie for the most part. And when it came out, I was like, well, wait a minute, what is that thing? I kind of was thrown off by the design of it. Almost wondering, are people going to think that's real? Or are they going to understand this is a mechanical, deadly device being controlled by a human? But the design of it is really interesting because it does have kind of a bug-like design, but very clearly the way the little legs kind of dangle out, as it comes out of the hole, you're like, oh, okay, this is not something that is natural. But I loved the introduction of the idea of Paul moves into the projection of the bush, almost to hide himself, even though that's not going to work in this case. But I just thought that was brilliant from a cinematic standpoint and just creating more of a dynamic scene. And then when Paul stops it and crushes it, and then he opens it in his hand, then very clearly it's mechanical, right? Because it's sparking and smoking. So yeah, although at first I was a little thrown, I was like, wait a minute, what have they done here? And then I realized, oh, okay, it's made to look like something natural, but it's mechanical.
Also, the first appearance of a little mouse that's not a Disney character.
Yeah, and then of course, immediately after that scene, we immediately see the consequences of what happened. So that we see the Harkonnen who had been basically like buried alive in the wall and was controlling it. So we see the sabotage that's going on, where Tuber Howard is obviously very, very nervous. And goes and he wants to hand his recognition to Duke Leto. Simon, what did you think about the interaction between those characters?
So I felt Oscar Isaac was just being dad there, and he was like, I don't care if you want to resign. My son was going to get assassinated. Like, we can talk about, turning in your paperwork later. Why is my son getting assassinated? Like, where is this coming from? And he's just like, I'm sorry, my lord. Like, I messed up. I thought, once again, what limited time we have with Oscar Isaac in this movie, really, every scene he's great in, and it's perfection.
We immediately have the consequences of that scene, and I love how they've been handling the transitions between the different planets here, because the last time we had the training room scene where Paul and Gurney were fighting, and you have like Gurney talking about how brutal the Harkonnens are, and then you're taken to Giedi Prime, and then again here you see like the Harkonnens have been sabotaging, they've almost killed Paul, and then now we go immediately to Giedi Prime. And it's actually an interesting situation, because we actually see Reverend Mother Mohayam. She's going to Giedi Prime, which I thought was interesting how they played it out. So we have that interesting conversation, and we have there's so much details in that scene. Start with you, Johnny. Like, what did you take out of that scene?
First off, I love the aesthetics of Giedi Prime in general, but this room in particular is just like, it's got this weird alien slimy kind of feel to it. But
are you talking about the spider in the room?
Well, of course we do have a giant spider hand critter thing going on. I would love to know, how did they decide there was going to be a pet or a creature of some sort? And then once they decided on that, when did they decide, okay, this is what it's going to be, and it's going to look like this, and it's going to act like this? Oh, and we're going to get this actor to come and play it and do the movements and actually, build off of that with some CG. That was certainly not anything I was expecting. But I just love that little detail, because again, it kind of builds out the world a little bit. Like, it's a creepy, it's kind of unnecessary to what's going on in that moment, leading into the scene. But it's like, oh my god, like that is so creepy and disturbing, and like in a very uncanny kind of terrifying way, because it's clearly not, it's not a person, but it's human in some regard, because it has human hands, 4 feet, and it has its head that you can see at the far end away from the camera. It looks like it has a human-shaped head, and it's eating like with a human-shaped mouth and everything. So very, very creepy, very disturbing. Shows you, the Harkonnens are up to some nasty stuff. And of course, it also adds that little moment of kind of like almost like levity, where the Reverend Mother, Piter's trying to tell her, oh, it's not going to understand your language or whatever. And then she, of course, is like snaps at it and is like, get out. And it starts to move away all creepy. And she's like, oh, it understands. So I thought that was great. And just kind of automatically reminds you that the Reverend Mother is really, really the boss of everyone, that, that she's not there to be played by the Baron or any of the Harkonnens. And then, of course, there's also this really cool silencer kind of, I don't know how you would describe it, like a cloaking device for sound that drops on them. And that makes sure that no one outside of those three hears the details about how the Emperor is plotting with them, is going to give them Sardaukar to go to Arrakis to attack them. And in the book, of course, for anyone that's read the book, we know that the Sardaukar and the Emperor, he wants to be totally secret about the fact that he's helping the Baron. That would be politically catastrophic if that was to be found out, of course. So in this instance, on Giedi Prime, they use that silencer device, and then they mention during the scene, the Baron says, there's no satellites over Arrakis. No one is going to find out about this. It's going to be completely off the books. And so, for example, in the book, the Sardaukar, they dress up as Harkonnens, right? And so they're wearing their uniforms. But in the movie, they're not. They're wearing their own typical Imperial uniforms. And I think that was the best way to go and giving those little lines of dialogue to explain why no one else would find out about it. I thought that was just easier because, again, you're changing the medium. In the book, you can read, oh, it's clearly Sardaukar. They're wearing another costume. In this, it's like, how are you going to expect anyone who knows nothing about this world to look at these people wearing the same exact thing and be like, oh, yeah, that's who that is. So I thought that little bit of dialogue was key. And then, of course, once she leaves, there's the back and forth between Piter that I liked, where it emphasizes that, well, they are kind of scared of the Reverend Mother because they know that she's a truthsayer. They know that they can get the truth out of them if it comes to that. And that comes back later on once they take Paul and Jessica as captives. They can't kill them, technically. They can't do it with their own hand. And I thought that was such a smart way. And of course, this is in the book as well. But in a lot of movies like this, action movies or whatever, action adventure movies, the bad guys, they should just kill the good guys. Why do they have them prisoner? They could escape. They could not, they could somehow survive. Why leave it to chance? Why tie them up to a bomb or anything like that? But in this, there's a valid, actual reason why they can't kill them, because they made a promise to the Reverend Mother. So to keep that promise, they do keep them captive. They do, gag them, and they say they're going to take them out to the desert. And of course, the Baron, my Dune, my Arrakis, where he floats up, and we get to see his suspensors in action for the first time, which again is a great effect, looks awesome, and the music that kicks in as well. I just thought this is the last piece that we see on Giedi Prime, at least until the next movie. I thought it was really effective and really sets the plot from that there on into motion into the attack.
One of the craziest notions I've heard about this scene, because, it's the internet, and the internet's crazy sometimes, that spider thin is Yuri's wife, and they're experimenting on her. I'm like, all right, internet, calm down. I will say the first time seeing it, when the spider shows up, I agree with Johnny. It gives you that creepy, like, wait, what is going on here? Like, I don't feel comfortable watching this. It gives you that eerie vibe that I feel like the Harkonnens live off of. You shouldn't feel comfortable in front of any of them, especially in front of the Baron. I like this scene. Like we said, it's not in the book, but I feel like it's important because, once again, it introduces that the Bene Gesserit are working behind the scenes, and they're the ones that control pretty much the whole universe. In the Lynch movie, we have that whole entire line, he who controls the spice controls the universe. Well, I think it's the Bene Gesserit, and it's proven in the books and in this movie. And I've said this before, but Piter is the standout performance for me in this whole entire movie. I wish we had more.
Yeah, and this scene, I think it illustrates what we were saying before, that like, obviously, if they were going to include every single scene from the book, if they were going to go into detail on every aspect, the film would be much longer, and it wouldn't be realistic to release it theatrically. But for people who have read the book, and for people who have read some of the expanded books, like the prequels, again, like none of that is necessary. But if you have happened to read those books, this scene has so much additional depth. So I won't spoil it, but like you have the where basically the Reverend Mother is saying that that Jessica, and by extension Paul, is under the protection of the Order, so you better not touch them. And how the Baron responds, like, I would never dream of violating the sanctity of your Order. But if you know the whole story, you know that he has definitely violated the Bene Gesserit before. So that it really has like a lot of just a lot going on beneath the surface of the scene. And again, like, you don't have to pick up all of this, but like for people who have, gone deep into the Dune lore, it's like all this additional information that is really, you can tell that Denis, he's a big fan, and he's really gone into detail, and that the state as well has also been involved in this. Okay, so that's all for today. So we're getting further into the movie. Next week we're going to continue on Arrakis with the spice harvester scene and the attack. So there will be a lot to explore there, including the dreams. So really excited to talk about that. Garen, where can people find you?
Hey, it's Garen at Dune Companion on Twitter. Find me there, and we'll talk to you real soon.
And I'm Johnny Sobchak, of course. You can find me on Twitter, Johnny Sobchak. More buzz about this movie. Loving it. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts. Please do leave a comment. I need to get into the comment section more and have some discussion and whatnot. And I look forward to doing that as we get deeper into the movie.
Hey, Simon here. Follow me on social if you want, SDowdy. And also remember to like and subscribe and hit that smash button. Sorry, I had to be that YouTuber. I had to do it once. I won't do it for another 20 shows.
This is Marcus Gabriel. You can find me on DuneNewsNet.com and DuneNewsNet on Twitter and Instagram. And looking forward to talking to you next week as we continue our movie review series.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.